It was just another rainy evening in Atlanta when Ebony Jacobs, the newly appointed chief legal advisor to Governor Alexander McKinley, found herself pulled over by a police officer on the outskirts of the city. What seemed like an ordinary traffic stop quickly escalated into something much more sinister. The flashing red and blue lights felt like a warning, an omen that something dark was unfolding just beneath the surface. In this story, we dive into the legal system's deep flaws and show how one woman's determination can change everything. Don't miss out on the gripping turn of events that exposes the truth behind the courtroom. And if it's your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Show some love by liking the video. Ebony had done nothing wrong. Her registration was current, her insurance up to date, and she wasn't speeding. Yet, as Officer Reinhardt approached her vehicle, his narrowed eyes told a different story, one she knew all too well. She'd seen it before. The suspicion that came with being a black woman, the unfair presumption of guilt that had followed her entire life. But Ebony wasn't afraid, not really. She had earned her place at the governor's side through hard work, by reforming the very system that so often victimized people like her. But tonight, she wasn't just a legal advisor. Tonight, she was a defendant, facing the cruel bias embedded in the very system she sought to change. Reinhardt, with no reason but his own prejudice, accused her of resisting an investigation, a claim as baseless as the idea that she might have been intoxicated. When Ebony calmly refused a vehicle search, citing her Fourth Amendment rights, the officer's frustration grew. What followed next wasn't just an arrest. It was a clear message from the justice system. Even the most accomplished, the most qualified, the most law-abiding were not immune to its flaws. The arrest set off a chain reaction. By the time Ebony was processed in the local precinct, her name was making its way through the courthouse rumors, setting the stage for a confrontation that would go far beyond the simple injustice of a traffic stop. She was about to enter the courtroom, a place where power and prejudice often collided. The judge, Hamilton Wright, was known for his harsh sentences and his unwavering biases. Ebony had heard whispers about him, rumors about his tendency to lean on the side of the prosecution, especially when the defendant was black. But nothing could have prepared her for what was coming. As she stood in the courtroom that day, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been treated unjustly by a biased system. Ebony's nerves didn't show. Her face was calm, her suit pristine, but inside, a storm was brewing. This was a moment that could change everything. She was about to face a judge who seemed determined to make an example of her, to wield his power like a hammer. The stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just about one woman's fight for fairness. It was about the very integrity of the system that claimed to deliver justice. And the courtroom, a place that should have been a sanctuary for truth, was about to be the battleground where she would either lose everything or ignite a fire that would change the course of her life forever. The gavel struck, and the room fell into a hushed stillness. Judge Hamilton Wright's voice broke through the silence, his words thick with authority. "Ms. Ebony Jacobs, you stand accused of obstructing a police officer in the course of his duties. How do you plead?" Ebony stood tall, her eyes unwavering as they met the judge's gaze. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, but she refused to be swayed. She had walked this path for years, challenging systemic injustice, advocating for reform, and fighting for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Today, it wasn't just her reputation on the line. It was the very foundation of the legal system she had worked so tirelessly to improve. Her voice, calm and measured, filled the courtroom as she responded, "Your Honor, I plead not guilty. I was unfairly detained and accused without cause." But Judge Wright, the man who had become infamous for his tough stance on crime, wasn't interested in her innocence. The flicker in his eyes, the way he scrutinized her with a certain coldness. He had already made up his mind. The atmosphere in the room grew thick with tension as he looked down at her file, and his voice echoed once more, "I see no representation. Do you have counsel?" Ebony swallowed, choosing her words carefully. I've had no time to secure an attorney, Your Honor, but I request a continuance. She felt a quiet surge of defiance. This wasn't just a formality. This was her fight. Judge Wright's smirk deepened. Very well. The court will note your request. However, this court will proceed with setting bail. Officer Reinhardt has stated you were resisting a lawful investigation, and that raises serious concerns about your suitability to be out on bail. Ebony felt her stomach drop. Bail was usually a simple matter, but she knew this was no ordinary case. This was personal. This was a judge who had earned a reputation for stacking the deck against defendants who didn't fit his idea of respectable. Bail is set at $10,000, Judge Wright pronounced. Ebony's heart raced. $10,000 for a charge with no merit. The words hit her like a slap in the face. She knew the typical bail for such a minor charge, even if it were legitimate, wouldn't have come close to that amount. This was a clear move to intimidate, to make her feel powerless. But Ebony stood firm. Her mind raced, her pulse quickened, but she wasn't going to let this system break her. The gavel struck once more, and she was escorted out of the courtroom, her thoughts whirling. She had been in courtrooms countless times as a legal advisor, but now, as a defendant, she felt the weight of every inch of that wood-paneled space press down on her. As she moved through the courthouse corridors, the whispers began. People who had never known her began to see her in a new light. Ebony Jacobs, the governor's legal right hand, behind bars, waiting for her fate to be decided. The humiliation stung, but she wasn't about to let them see her falter. She had a mission, a cause greater than herself. It wasn't just her future at stake. It was the future of everyone who had ever been wronged by a biased system. Later that evening, after posting bail, Ebony met with her trusted allies. Amanda Persing, a renowned civil rights attorney, and Samuel Lee, the governor's deputy chief of staff. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Amanda's face was set with determination as she laid out the legal path forward. This isn't just about you anymore, Ebony. This is about exposing a corrupt system that's been operating right under our noses. Samuel, ever the strategist, nodded. Once the governor's office is involved, this will blow up. But we need hard evidence. Ebony nodded. She had known this wasn't going to be easy. But now, more than ever, the fight was necessary. It was bigger than any one person. It was a battle for truth, for fairness, for justice. The next morning, Ebony found herself sitting across from the governor, a man who had always believed in her integrity. Governor McKinley, tall and stoic, listened intently as she recounted the events. His expression darkened as she spoke. "This isn't just a personal matter, Ebony," he said, his voice low and resolute. "This is a test for all the reforms we've worked on, and we won't let this slide." His words were a lifeline, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, she wasn't fighting alone. With the governor's support, Ebony felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a victim of a corrupt system. She was now the person who was going to bring that system to its knees. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Amanda was already working on filing a motion to dismiss, and Samuel was pulling strings behind the scenes, trying to get access to critical footage that could prove the officer's account was fabricated. But Ebony knew this wasn't going to be easy. The odds were stacked against her, and the system had a way of defending its own, no matter how flawed. But she wasn't backing down, not this time. This fight wasn't just about her freedom. It was about ensuring that no one else would ever have to endure the same injustice, and no matter how hard the battle would be, she was ready. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late-night strategy sessions. Ebony felt the pressure of the case bearing down on her, but she refused to let it break her. She had always known that true change never came easily. And now, as she stood on the precipice of a fight that could change the course of her life, and the lives of countless others, she felt something deep within her stir. Resolve. This wasn't just about one woman's fight against a biased system. This was about something much larger, A battle to reclaim justice for every person who had ever been silenced, every individual who had been swallowed by a system that failed to see them as human. The preliminary hearing was set. As Ebony stood in the courthouse that day, the air crackled with a tension she could feel in her bones. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, cameras poised and ready, while the opposing side, Officer Reinhardt and his supporters, sat rigid, trying to mask their nervousness. But Ebony, her chin high and her shoulders squared, knew this was her moment. This was the moment where the truth would either stand tall or be buried beneath the weight of an unjust system. When the witness, the woman who had filmed part of Ebony's arrest, took the stand, Ebony's heart skipped a beat. The footage she'd been waiting for, the one that could expose Officer Reinhardt's lies, was now in the courtroom, ready to shatter the false narrative that had been built against her. As the footage played, the room fell silent. The video clearly showed Ebony's calm demeanor, her polite responses, and most importantly, the officer's unjustified aggression. The truth was laid bare for everyone to see. But Judge Wright, ever the master of deflection, refused to accept the footage as conclusive. He tried to downplay its importance, but the damage was already done. The truth had started to slip through the cracks in the system, and there was no way it could be ignored. The court might have ruled against Ebony that day, but in reality, it had lost. The judge, the officer, the entire system, they were all exposed for what they truly were: flawed, broken, and unwilling to acknowledge the pain they had caused. As Ebony left the courthouse that afternoon, surrounded by her allies, she felt a sense of both victory and loss. The fight wasn't over yet, but she had made sure that the truth was no longer something that could be swept under the rug. She had forced the system to look at itself, to reckon with the biases and the injustices it had long allowed to thrive in the shadows. And as she walked through the corridors of power, she knew this was just the beginning. She was going to keep fighting, for herself, for the people who had been wronged, and for the future of a justice system that still had a chance to be fixed. In the weeks that followed, the story of Ebony's arrest and her subsequent legal battle became a symbol of what happens when one person, standing alone, refuses to bow to a broken system. A symbol of courage, of resilience, and of the power of truth. The media that once sought to tear her down now turned its spotlight on the corrupt practices that had been exposed, and with every story, more voices joined hers. The pattern of racial bias in the courtroom, the police misconduct, it could no longer be ignored. Ebony Jacobs, the governor's chief legal advisor, had walked into that courtroom as a defendant, but she walked out as a leader. And the message she sent reverberated far beyond the courthouse doors. The fight for justice is never easy, but it is always worth it. No matter how high the stakes, no matter how fierce the opposition, one person can make a difference. And when we stand together, when we refuse to be silenced, we are unstoppable. The battle for justice had only just begun, but one thing was clear: Ebony Jacobs was ready to take it all the way. Because justice isn't just about winning a case, it's about creating a world where everyone is truly equal. And that's a fight worth having.